One thing that's very important is that it established solidarity with oppressed people of the world as a guiding principle of foreign policy. And that's like something that, you know, I don't think we can even imagine in the U.S. That, like, the U.S. claims that it's going to, you know, in terms of solidarity with other people, but really it's going for, you know, the other kind of occupation, imperialist occupation and domination. So the Soviet Union, when it came along, it really established true solidarity as a policy for foreign policy. And it made, you know, all these other accomplishments that Caleb mentioned in a world dominated by developed imperialism. Just to briefly go again, to talk again about Cuba, you know, Cuba has not only provided healthcare for all its people in its own country, but it exports doctors all over the world. I don't know if folks remember, but when Katrina happened, Cuba had doctors lined up, ready to get on planes to come to the United States to support the people of Katrina, and the U.S. turned them down. You know, the kind of the communist like anthem is the International, and one of the phrases in the International says, "No more traditions, change shall bind us." And I always like to say that Cuba really exemplifies that slogan, "No more traditions, change will bind us." And one example is that they really work to change the perceptions toward LGBTQ people in Cuba. They have an organization called Cinesex, and they actively go out into communities and try to change perceptions and around lesbian, gay, bi, and trans people and queer people. Women make up a fundamental core of the leaders, thinkers, and workers in Cuban society. So that's just, you know, a snapshot of what it's kind of looked like in other countries. And again, it'll be different everywhere. But so now, studying what was accomplished in the Soviet Union and what is still being accomplished in socialist countries like Cuba shows what potential socialism and a planned economy has for the entire world if it's built on a strong economic foundation, free of imperialist war and imperialist sabotage. From an economic standpoint, the world has never been more ripe for socialism. A huge, technologically developed, centrally organized economy could definitely meet everyone's needs. And that's, you know, that's pretty obvious. Everyone knows that the U.S. could, the economy in the U.S. and the economy as it stands now could provide for everyone. But anyways, so there's a book, The Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, written by Vladimir Lenin. And he said, this is a quote, "When a big enterprise assumes gigantic proportions and organizes according to plan the supply of primary raw materials to the extent of 2/3 or 3/4 of all that is necessary for tens of millions of people, when the raw materials are transported to the most suitable place of production, sometimes hundreds and thousands of miles away, in a systematic and organized manner, when a single center directs all the successive stages of work, right up to the manufacture of numerous varieties of finished articles, when these products are distributed according to a single plan among tens and hundreds and millions of consumers, then it becomes evident that we have socialization of production, that private economic relations and private property relations constitute a shell which is no longer suitable for its contents, a shell which will inevitably be removed." So Lenin wrote this in 1917, and he was talking about the U.S. Oil Trust and the marketing and the sale of oil in both the U.S. and Germany. And he was saying that, you know, production is socialized already, but what needs to change is the property relations, and those need to be socialized as well. Now, he wrote that in 1917, and we could just think about how much the system of organized production and profits has expanded since then. We're in 2012 now. As that system has expanded, it's also expanded the worldwide working class, and it's expanded the material basis for socialism. Marx and Engels, the founders of scientific socialism, explained that the most favorable foundation for the development of socialist society was in those countries where, so there's two conditions that he said. First, he said it would be in those countries where capitalism had already brought production to a very high level. And the second condition would be that it would happen where the working class was the most numerous and had a relatively high level of literacy and technical ability arising from its role in large-scale production. The transition to a society where social planning could take place and goods could be distributed equitably to all the workers would be most easily accomplished in an environment of relative abundance. And which country has more relative abundance than right here in the U.S.? Now, Russia was the poorest of all the 13 European capitalist powers at the time of the Russian Revolution. And Cuba has had, as Caleb mentioned, has had to deal with this, more than 50 years of a blockade imposed by the US upon it, which prevents it from getting all kinds of resources, medical supplies, almost everything that a whole lot that people need. Cuba's also dealt with numerous terrorist attacks, many that are based in Miami, and other threats that have all been supported by the US. But what the USSR and Cuba have accomplished, like Kayla mentioned, while constricted within highly unfavorable historical circumstances, speaks volumes about what a socialist revolution could do under more favorable conditions. And again, who has more favorable conditions than the US? So I felt like when I was writing this, maybe this talk feels somewhat unfair because I was asked to talk about what socialism could look like in the US, and maybe I kind of equivocated by saying that we didn't know. But here's what I wanted to give. I wanted to kind of personalize it and give a vision of what I think socialism will look like in the US and what it will look like for me as a relatively young queer woman of color. So one of the things that I thought about was that, the idea of police brutality and police repression would be a thing of the past. My first thing, I'm from Los Angeles, and my first inklings of political consciousness were after the Rodney King rebellions happened in my neighborhood. And when one and another of my friends, who were all young black men, were harassed over and over and arrested over and over by the cops in LA. So, when we win socialism in the US, those kind of things will become a thing of the past. Because once the antagonism between the state and the people, which is kind of what Richard was talking about earlier, once that antagonism no longer exists, there will no longer be a need for a repressive police force, and therefore, police brutality. Another example is I will no longer owe $35,000 in student loans, as all student debt will be eliminated. In Cuba, for example, people go to university for free, and actually there's a Latin American School of Medicine in Cuba that brings students from all around the world to study, including students from the US, with the condition that they will go back into their communities and serve their communities once they graduate from medical school. So anyway, so just like I'm at CUNY, and just like CUNY was in the past, all schooling will be free. Another example, my partner, who is a transgender man, won't have to jump through a billion hoops when it comes to getting trans-sensitive health insurance or applying for student loans, because every year when he has to apply for student loans, they tell him that he can't get student loans because he didn't register for the Selective Service, for the draft, which he didn't have to do when he turned 18 because he was listed as female on his birth certificate. So it's this drama he has to go through every year. Anyways, as institutionalized discrimination against LGBTQ people is done away with, I will have to worry less and less about my friends getting beat up by bigots in the streets. My partner, he just got in under the wire before the state of New York mandated that Medicaid could no longer provide for gender reassignment surgery, which is something that's being now provided in Cuba, for example. So under socialism, those surgeries, along with hormones and all other trans-specific healthcare needs, will be free. One more example. Billboards will no longer market everything under the sun, from soda to beer to automobiles, by selling them in relation to sexualized women's bodies. One of the things, I've actually been to Cuba a few times, and one of the most moving things to me, despite all the healthcare and all the education and all that, one of the most moving things to me is that when you walk down the street in Cuba, the billboards have as opposed to all this marketing, they have revolutionary slogans, but they don't have these